Welcome to Decaf, a production of the Beacon Center of Tennessee. I'm Taylor, and as always, I'm here with my friend and coworker, Mark. Mark, how's it going today?
It's good. I'm excited to be here.
Good. Do you have your coffee this morning, or do you have an energy drink?
No, I'm doing a blackberry. It's actually new, a highball blackberry.
Okay.
So I don't know if you can see that. So it's no sugar. And it is just like it's like sparkling water, but with energy. So
yeah.
it's a much better option than Red Bull, which I normally drink. So I'm trying. This is a little bit of a healthier option.
Well, I was going through my Instagram stories archive the other day, and I had a video from about this time in 2018. I started my job in August 2018. I had a video from September 2018 of you and I in an elevator in our old office building, and you were literally bouncing off the walls because you had two of those Mountain Dew energy drinks that you used to drink. And that, I think, was a wake-up call for all of us that you needed to stop consuming those drinks.
Those amps are so delicious and they're so good, but they give you, when you have more than one of them, they give you too much energy. But it's great if it's like a midnight drive where you can't stay awake. Like, that is the one thing that can guarantee you'll stay awake. You might not sleep for 24 hours, but you'll stay awake.
My skin still acts like that of a teenage girl. And if I had that much sugar in my system, my face would just explode, like, just period. I wouldn't stand a chance. It would just erupt. Speaking of my face exploding, my brains were about to explode the other day when I heard about the deal that Metro Nashville wanted to make to try to get the RNC. Well, I wouldn't say Metro Nashville, but it was only a few members of the council wanted to do this. But the deal that they wanted to make with the state to try to get the RNC, and I think it was the World Cup, but specifically the RNC, to come to Nashville. Things like permissions for impact fees and exclusionary zoning, basically trading two really bad policies for one convention that would last a few days. Mark, why was that so insane? I mean, I think I've pretty well articulated it, but you got any thoughts about why it would be so insane to trade impact fees and inclusionary zoning for one convention in Nashville? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, I mean, the thing is, they were trying to hold them hostage, the legislature, because they could have the RNC. They're the ones who voted against it. It's not like they don't want it here, and they're saying, you know what, we don't want it here because we disagree with their politics.
They being
the DNC,
they being Metro Council,
the Metro Council. Yes. If it was the Democratic National Convention, I'm sure there'd be no issues with it. But they didn't want this convention. They're saying, you know what, we can maybe get some stuff in exchange for this thing will be a great economic impact for the city of Nashville. Now, I'm kind of on the fence on this because, of course, we want these kind of conventions.
Sure.
I just don't know what's going to cost from taxpayers. But the idea of holding, something like this hostage because of your political leanings and the fact that you don't agree with the party in power. Mayors for years and years and years say, you know what? I don't care if it's my party. It's going to be a big economic impact for our city, right? I mean, Milwaukee, who seems to be the front runner right now, that's a city run by Democrats, and they seem fine with it because they understand the economic boon it's going to bring. Again, as long as we're not putting a bunch of tax dollars into it, right. I think it's great. So I think that what happened was Metro Council overplayed their hand, and they thought, you know what, we'll get this money in this, and we'll be able to force them to also do these other horrible policies that we want. And it just did not work out for them. And ultimately, the city of Nashville and the state of Tennessee is going to suffer a bit from this,
sure,
because we're not getting this. And I've always had just such a weird thing for conventions. I hate it personally. It brings in a ton of traffic. It makes it impossible to go anywhere. But of course, it's also a positive for the city and the business owners and all those things. And as long as we're not putting our tax dollars out to bring them here, I think those are great.
And as long as we're not enacting two really bad policies in exchange for it, it would have been just if everything had been neutral, policy neutral, taxpayer cost neutral, the people who come here have to pay for it, whatever, that would have been fine. But the whole way this was done is, in my opinion, the reason that people distrust people in politics is we're going to make all these deals and we're going to get what we want. And we're going to put things in place that do not benefit the residents and the taxpayers just to be able to do this one thing. And I, for one, am thankful that we will not see impact fees and inclusionary zoning in exchange for this. Like, that would have been an absolute disaster for homeowners. It would have driven up the price of homes even more in Nashville. Yep. It would have been an absolute disaster. So if they want to strike a good deal, a fair deal, and bring conventions here, I'm for it. I'll go home to Anniston and hang out with my mom while the convention is in town because I cannot handle it. But I'm for it. But these bad shady deals, man, I'm glad that this one didn't happen.
I think truly the Metro Nashville Council needs to take a look at themselves in the mirror and say, was this political? And I think the answer is yes. And you say, if this was the DNC, would we have said yes to it? And I think that's a real problem where these people who claim to be for citizens and claim to say, you know what, we want to care about these small business owners, we want to care about this community, to basically pick politics over kind of what they think is right, because I don't think it's a moral obligation to conventions. They bring conventions all the time. Right. So if it's not that, and if they even said, you know what, we don't want to put tax dollars in that, fine. But they made a political decision based on the party that is, 90% of the Metro Council, even though it's, we know where they stand, even though they might not be registered that way. We can't see what party they are. They identify as Democrats, and they didn't want the opposing party to come to Nashville. And I think it's a really sad commentary on where we're at as a country right now. And I think it speaks very low about about the Metro Council generally and what they're actually trying to do for citizens of Nashville.
Yeah, it's very sad for Nashville and for Tennessee and for people who actually want to see fairness in how government decisions are made, to see something like this go on. It's a bummer. I don't know if there is a point of redemption in the future for them, but I'm not holding my breath for it. And that's kind of bleak.
Yeah, I mean, just stop being overt. Don't be overtly political. I mean, these are things for your city. It doesn't matter where I don't know if this has happened previously, because pretty much every city that is a finalist for any of these conventions, DNC or RNC, is rolling out the red carpet, trying to get them to come there.
I know.
It's weird to have a city basically say, no, we don't want you.
Yeah, it's sad. It's sad to see Nashville trending in this direction, especially when there are conventions at the Music City Center every single week. But
which we paid for. Right. We paid for the Music City Center.
I know. Excellent point, Mark. Taxpayers paid for it. If it's that big of a deal, put it to a vote, slap it on a ballot, see what people really think of things like this. But that's never going to happen. And I also think it's too little of a deal to put on a ballot. But you know what I mean? We paid for it, so we should have a say in what's going on. Anyway, I digress. I could talk about this all day. Nancy Pelosi is in Taiwan. Okay. I don't have a smooth transition to get into that because this is a big deal. Nancy Pelosi is in Taiwan. I didn't think it was actually going to happen. A lot of people didn't think it was actually going to happen. Let's talk about how insane a country has to be to say, if a politician from the United States goes to another country, we're going to shoot her plane out of the air. What in the world? First, you've got Russia attacking Ukraine, then China threatening to attack Taiwan. And because the U.S. is recognizing this democratic sovereignty of Taiwan and sending a politician there, the Chinese are threatening to shoot her plane out of the sky. What in the world is going on in their brains? I don't understand.
I mean, we can't say the Chinese. It was one random kind of, propaganda for the government. It's not like the official government said.
Sure, but the president,
I know they don't like it.
But the president of China on a phone call with President Biden said something like, those who play with fire will be punished by fire, something to that effect. And
they certainly don't.
That's a threat.
They certainly don't like it.
That's a threat. I think it's a threat.
I don't think it's a physical threat. I think that might say, you know what, it might be a trading threat. It might be something they're going to do, with our trade deals. I don't think it's a physical
Either way,
threat,
if I had been Nancy Pelosi, I would have stayed at home after that. I would have gone.
I think you have to give her credit. I think you have to give her credit because this is something, and this is a big deal. I think she's the highest ranking person to visit Taiwan in
since
25 years in the U.S. government. And at a time where, the NBA is afraid to stand up to China. There's so many organizations that are afraid to stand up to China. The fact that we have somebody as high ranked as Nancy Pelosi going there, it's a really big deal. And it's a really big deal for, Taiwan's sovereignty. And as we talked about before, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, you wondered, is China going to do this to Taiwan? And kind of these outward shows of support from America, it makes it a lot harder for them to do that, because they're saying, we clearly stand with Taiwan, which is a real country, despite what John Cena says. It is definitely a real country. And it's actually a super encouraging thing, because, of course, I don't always care for Nancy Pelosi. I don't always care for, the policy she pushes. But I think this is a really great step. And it's something that, I think Americans can be proud of, to say we're standing with, this country, Taiwan, that they deserve independence, and they are independent. So it's just a show of support to say we recognize them as a legitimate country that we're going to meet with. So my hat's off to Nancy Pelosi. Good for her.
Yes. When I said I would have stayed at home once I had heard the crazy propaganda commentator and then also the phone call that President Xi had with President Biden, I was saying that as like, I am amazed that she went. I think that takes extraordinary bravery to know, even with all the security that I'm sure she has, sometimes things can't be stopped. And she said, I'm doing this anyway. I'm recognizing the democracy of Taiwan. And you know me, you know how I feel about democracy. It's like, I will stand for it every day of my life. And I just think I'm the last person to ever compliment Nancy Pelosi, but you got to give credit where credit's due. That is a brave woman to go and do that. And I think it's really cool, the show of support.
And I'll be the first one to say, I don't quite understand all the geopolitical factors, but it would be absolutely shocking if China actually did anything to her. Those are clearly empty threats in my mind, because they don't want to get into a war with us.
Sure.
And if you shoot down the plane, of the majority speaker of the House, that is grounds for getting into war. So I don't think they would ever do it. I feel like they are probably empty threats, but I understand why, even though you might be 95 or 98% sure it's an empty threat, like if you're one of that 1 or 2% wrong, you might die. So yes. I understand that there's still some risk there, but I think, I would have liked to think that if I was in her position, I would have had no problem going, and I'm really glad she did. And I think it's a good time to put, we always hear about these partisan politics, put it aside and say, I think the Republicans should say, great job, Nancy Pelosi. I think they should say, thank you for standing for, the independence of a free, country of Taiwan.
Well, you're braver than me. I read in Axios this morning that the Chinese had planned military exercises in the South China Sea through her entire stay in Taiwan. So they're doing everything they can to flex, and like when peacocks show their feathers and they're doing it to assert dominance, they're like peacocking and trying to show their dominance, and it's just not. It's kind of desperate looking. It's kind of sad, but nevertheless, with me and my anxiety, I would have stayed at home. But y'all are braver than I am, for sure.
They know how to put on a show. That's for sure.
Definitely for sure. Who else knows how to put on a show is all of these MLB teams that had all of us sweating yesterday at the trading deadline to see what was going to happen with our teams. We got to talk about something fun to detract from bad policy and Nancy Pelosi in Taiwan. So let's talk about baseball. I think I speak for at least half of the Beacon team, if not all of us, and most of the baseball fans in America, when I say the trading deadline day, it keeps the girls sweating. You're just waiting to see who's going to end up in your bullpen, who's going to end up on your team. It's stressful. Mark, what are some of the observations you made on the trading during the week leading up to the trading deadline and yesterday?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of trades that people thought were going to happen that didn't. And I think I read, somewhere they said it might be the biggest trade deadline in history, that Juan Soto, the star 23-year-old from the Nationals, went to the Padres, along with Josh Bell, who is a really good player. I think that a lot of people aren't really, understanding how big of an impact he's going to have. So the Padres basically went from a very mediocre, probable playoff team to a World Series contender.
I know.
And you saw some other teams competing for the World Series who did some stuff. I mean, we'll talk about the Braves later, but the Twins did a lot of great things that people aren't talking about. Tyler Mahle is a fantastic starter from the Reds. They got an all-star closer, Jorge Lopez. They got another almost all-star closer, Michael Fulmer. So they did a really good job with their bullpen. And the Dodgers did some weird stuff. But they got Joey Gallo, who was like the guy who was paid a ton of money, has really disappointed. The Yankees fans had been booing him, and he gets a fresh start, and it might be good for him. And I saw, as bad as he has been over the past year and a half, he's still been better than Cody Bellinger, who is their starting for the Dodgers right now. So they may have gotten an upgrade, and they got him at a real deep discount that could proved to be something, great for them. And the Phillies did a great job. They got some real good starting pitching, including Thor. I don't know if you know a Syndergaard he's got the Thor hair, so they call him Thor.
Know.
Oh yeah. Okay. So they got him and some closers. So no, it's really interesting. And some of these top teams and kind of the Astros are up, but beforehand, it's kind of the Yankees and the Dodgers, and instead of kind of two teams that could win, it seems like it's up to about 7 or 8. And we'll talk about the Braves, but they're kind of right on that cusp of like, I'm not sure if they're just a good team that's going to make the playoffs or if they can compete for another World Series. They're kind of, I think we'll find out in the next 2 months what they
Is it bad that when you mentioned that Cody Bellinger is not doing well, I cackled like an evil witch? There's just something in me that just can't stand him. And when you said he's not doing great, it like a cackle erupted me, like it out of me like an evil witch. Let's talk about the Braves for a second. So you pointed out to me that one of my favorite players, he's not great. Okay, I'm just gonna get it out there, and I know
not good. Forget not great.
Ehire Adrianza, I think I'm saying his name right. I just love him. He became a U.S. citizen last year, and he posted all over his Instagram about how proud he was to be an American, and it melted me. And so seeing him come back to the Braves, man, I know he's not a star, but I just love him. And so that was probably the highlight of my trade day. Now, I will say the highlight of my week has been Austin Riley's 10-year contract, especially after he absolutely smacked the ball on Sunday and on a walk-off run and a win for the Braves. But I love Austin Riley. I think he and his family are precious. I think he's a good player. I think he's good for team morale. This has nothing to do with trade day. I'm just saying, I'm so glad he's here to stay. Mark, let's talk about some of the Braves trades.
I want to talk about Adriana first. I'm sorry, I don't even say his name.
Adriana.
But I would love America too. Adriana, I'd love America too if I could make, millions of dollars and hit 179 for the season. Like, what a great country. You could be terrible at baseball and still get a bunch of money. So,
you're such a
but
hater.
It's cool that Braves brought him back. I mean, he wasn't a big part of last year's World Series, but I mean, he plays a lot of positions and the Braves did some other weird stuff. We talked about, they added Robbie Grossman, which I really like. I think Robbie Grossman is a very good utility player. He may start, and obviously you have, a couple guys who are out for a while in the outfield. So he'll start in the meantime, and he's kind of a guy who can hit, both sides and is very good defensively. I didn't understand. They traded Will Smith, who was a big part of their World Series run last year.
I'm really sad about that. When I got that ESPN alert yesterday, I was like working and my phone was like going off with all these ESPN alerts, like trade alert, trade alert, trade alert. That was the one that I was probably most sad about and didn't really understand. I don't know if you have any insight on that. I didn't get it. I didn't get it.
Well, so I did read about it, but I mean, it's really hard to find a high leverage left-hander out of your bullpen. Those are really hard to find. That's good like that. But essentially, he costs too much money, and they have to have him for even more money next year, and he's getting older. But it was just a strange trade because, like, they view themselves, they obviously made other moves to kind of say, like, we were trying to get better, but they did not get better by getting Jake Odorizzi, who, I mean, is fine, and he's a starter, which I guess they can use, but you that's hard. It's hard to talk about.
You get too fired up.
But it's hard. That's right. It's hard to get rid of one of the top end left-handed, relievers in baseball for a very mediocre starter.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure what they did with that, and they overpaid a lot. They got Raisel Iglesias, who is a fine, closer, but I mean, he has had a hard time hitting the strike zone this year. I mean, he's walking guys left and right. He's got great stuff, but they gave up some young prospects for him. Matt Davidson is a good prospect, and giving him up for, a very mediocre closer who can't find the plate sometimes. It was just a weird trade deadline for them. I think that they won in the way that, like, the Mets didn't get better either.
Which is
so I think
wipe the sweat off.
Yeah, because they're competing for that division. But instead of them and the Mets, with all the moves that were made in Philadelphia, that could end up being a three-way race now because the Phillies got way, way better. They added a ton of bullpen support, and they added a really good starter. So this could end up being, even though they're up 9 games, it's going to be a three-way race for the division. Of course, probably a wild card spot as well. So it'll be interesting. I don't love what the Braves did. I think they could have used, a couple more bats. and potentially another starter. And, it was just a weird trade deadline for them, especially because they made, in my opinion, I said this last year, they made such a splash at the trade deadline, and no one really talked about them because they're like, nobody cares about Jorge Soler.
But you did. Let me just tell everyone, when we won the World Series, Mark and I got on the podcast. If you weren't listening to the podcast last year and you're new to this, Mark got on the podcast and he goes, what did I say? What did I tell you? That the trade deadline was the point that turned the entire season around for you guys. Mark keeps an eye on these things, and he keeps me abreast of all the knowledge because I can't pay attention to everything all at the same time. But you do. And so if you're saying this wasn't as good as last year, I'm gonna just watch the rest of the season and on a hope and a prayer.
I mean, Jorge Soler and Adam Duvall were just such big additions. And I mean, nobody really paid attention because I think that everyone had kind of counted the Braves out because they knew Acuna was out. But these were big additions. And I still don't think they won the World Series, but I knew that was going to propel them to at least win the division. I don't think you got much better. I do think, the Braves will make the playoffs, but I don't see them making much noise as is. But now you have to remember the trade deadline is the first thing. Now you have buyouts. Now you have a couple teams saying, we don't want to pay you anymore. So that's where, the Braves can add some talent with other teams buying out some like decent players. I told Justin, I would have loved to see the Braves get Whit Merrifield from the Royals. They did not. And the Blue Jays actually got him instead, but that would have been a huge addition. So we're excited. We'll have to keep talking about baseball down the show.
I love when we get to talk about baseball and football. This is my favorite time of the year. Before we go, some interesting news came out last week about celebrities. We all know and we all hear celebrities love to virtue signal at us common folk for carbon emissions and for how we treat the climate. And yet they are out flying on their private jets and racking up carbon emissions. Taylor Swift being number one, Floyd Mayweather being number two. The list came out last week, and all of these celebrities have racked up so many carbon emissions. And listen, I'm just going to say it right now. If I had the money for a private jet, honey, I'd get one because I hate driving and I hate paying for flights. I'm not knocking the use of a private plane. What I'm knocking here is how we get virtue signaled and preached at and hollered at by these celebrities, and then they go and do the exact thing they're preaching and hollering about and rack up their own carbon emissions. I believe that the tweet that I read said, I have it right here. Okay. It said, Taylor Swift has emitted more CO2 this year than an average U.S. American does within 550 years, and more than a person from India in over 4,300 years. Okay, so with that, I don't want to hear anything else about climate and carbon emissions from celebrities. Mark, take it away.
I mean, they want you to make sacrifices that they're not willing to make. Right? They want people who are making, $30,000 a year to say, oh, no, you need to figure out a way to get an electric car because, the gas, even though you can't afford it. But meanwhile, these people who are they can't even fly commercial. That's how, selfish they are for these causes they're supposed to believe in. So, I mean, I think what it tells you is not that they're inconsistent. It tells you they don't really believe in these causes in the first place. They don't care. They think it's going to help them get fans, or it's going to make them seem responsible as they get more money for their next album or movie or whatever. And it's all trash. Everything that they don't believe in anything. And I really do believe a lot of these Hollywood people who talk so much about, we're losing democracy, we're doing these things. I think you go into the ballot box, I bet a lot of them vote for different parties than you think for it. They have this persona where they're like, let me talk about how much I hate all these people and all these conservatives are ruining America. And then they vote a different way. So I think it's just another example of the insane hypocrisy, but more so they don't care about these issues. If a celebrity's telling you something, just assume they don't actually care about what they're saying. That's a fun way.
I love when you paint with broad strokes and you say things like celebrities have no principles. Gosh, it's like it's such a hot take, such painting with a broad stroke.
Most celebrities.
You're not wrong for the most part. Gosh, I love it. Well, if anyone out there is listening and wants to buy me a private jet, I think I made it very clear that I'm not opposed to that. And I would welcome any gifts. Mark, you got any final thoughts before we sign off for the week?
Nope, we're good. See you next week.
All right. Well, for Taylor, Mark, and the entire Beacon team, this has been Decaf. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and we will catch you next week.